Barry Bonds, we're talking about the San Francisco Slugger that holds the home run record.
762 home runs, broke Hank Aaron's long-standing career record of 755. Also, Bonds hit the single-year record of 73 home runs in 1 year.
Well, that's a pretty outstanding record, and I'm sure, Tierney, you're familiar with Mr. Bonds. But, Mark, how is that brought to Law Talk tonight?
Well, Barry got in a little trouble with U.S. Attorney Matthew Parrella. And Barry Bonds, he was accused of using steroids to enhance his performance.
Well, was there any evidence that he had used steroids?
Well, he had, there was a Kimberly Bell, who was his mistress or girlfriend at one time. She did some interviews with Playboy, did an interview at Howard Stern, and then eventually ended up testifying at trial, saying that she thought she was doing, she never actually saw him use steroids, but she thought that he showed some symptoms of steroid use.
Well, how did that come to Law Talk tonight, Tierney?
So the most recent development was that the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals actually reversed the conviction of his obstruction of justice back in 2003. So now here we are, and he is still being held from the Cooperstown Baseball Hall of Fame, but was actually just inducted to the Bay Area Baseball Hall of Fame. So obviously he has a lot of local fans still, despite this past that he has, that he's trying to overturn. He still thinks he has a chance at the big Hall of Fame one day.
Well, I understand the obstruction of justice charge arose from his testimony at a grand jury hearing. Mm-hmm. But I also heard that at the testimony of the grand jury hearing wasn't obstruction of justice, but was simply not precise. Is that what happened, Mark?
Well, what happened, he had a meandering answer. And he went on giving some history, but eventually he denied. He said no. So it was a meandering answer, but he finally got around to answering the question. And so it was a very odd thing to really say that he was obstructing justice. What the Fed said was because of his answer was so vague that they had to continue investigating, and that cost them a lot of extra money. But it was kind of a roundabout obstruction of justice charge. It's very unusual.
Yeah, well, what I understand, it was a felony. They did convict him of a felony because of that.
Right.
But my question is, how can you convict somebody of a felony of obstruction of justice when they're not really obstructing justice? Isn't that what the Ninth Circuit really looked at, Tierney?
Mm-hmm. And I think now the question is, well, Matthew Parrella, is he going to want to push it farther? Does he want to take it to Supreme Court, all the way to Supreme Court? And I guess the question there is how much money, right, does he have to do that? That's going to take a lot to do it.
Well, the feds have unlimited resources because they can print the money. But I think what happens when you're a U.S. attorney, it's a matter of pride. I mean, you go up to the Ninth, you get reverse to the Ninth Circuit. That's a pretty big, pretty big item, and he may want to try and clear his name by going up to the Supreme Court and see if he can be successful there. Might backfire him.
Well, I understand that the Ninth Circuit actually, on a 3-judge panel, actually sided with the district attorney, and it was only when it was appealed en banc for the entire Ninth Circuit that it was actually overturned, and the appeal was granted.
Right.
But on behalf of Mr. Bonds.
But there was some, I think, some pretty stern language that the court used, and said that they've never quite seen anything like this or something of that nature. So they were a little bit surprised that someone could be convicted of an obstruction of justice when they actually just kind of give a vague answer and didn't actually, outright perjure themselves.
Well, I understand that besides the woman that gave the Playboy interview and what was her name?
Kimberly Bell.
Kimberly Bell. I understand beyond that there was no evidence that he ever actually used steroids of any sort.
Well, Kimberly Bell said that his head got bigger because he was using the steroids, and some of his private parts got smaller, and that was the evidence. And he became more irritable, and that was the evidence of the
acne
and things like that. Yeah, some of these were and then there was a guy named a fellow named Anderson who she said always had a satchel with him, and she was inferring that he would take that into the bath or in the bedroom near the kitchen, and he'd inject him there, but she never saw that. But Anderson never talked.
Well, I understand that Anderson actually went to federal prison for contempt of court for not testifying.
I think he did a year. Huh?
He did a year, and then he was released because they felt it was almost a habeas corpus issue at that point.
Right.
And the fact is, he never testified against Barry Bonds.
Right.
So we actually have no direct testimony from any source that indicates that he was actually juicing.
Except the big head.
Except for the big head, and I guess the trainer at the Giants noticed that when his ball cap didn't fit him anymore. That
If the hat does not fit,
then you must have quit.
Must have quit.
Yeah, but in this case, it was the hat didn't fit. You have to convict.
So
I think that's more the story in this case.
So, attorney, what do you think of the public outlook on Barry Bonds now? How do you think how does this affect I guess the baseball writers are very important, and whether he gets in the Hall of Fame. What's that look like for him?
Right. I mean, I think a lot of people think the court of public opinion weighs heavier than this obstruction of justice charge being reversed. I think even though he has a lot of local fans, Giants fans, I think nationwide overall, people just have a bad taste in their mouth about him, along with other big players like Roger Clemens and now A-Rod too, that just kind of have, shown that they might have used steroids, may not, and, people are quick to judge, so.
So do you, with that answer, you're kind of going because it was actually another person that was very famous in this home run derby that was going on at this time was Mark McGwire. And what's interesting about him, he finally admitted it. And you've had several players that initially denied it, then admitted it, and everything, but does it feel like to you that even though that he may be vindicated in the court system, that he may never be in the Baseball Hall of Fame? Right,
because I think he has to have a certain percentage of the writers okay it, and I think he hasn't been elected into it. I guess in his first 3 years of eligibility. I think maybe now he has a little bit more confidence now that he's been elected into the local Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame. And I think he just said a quote recently, I believe eventually the right thing will be done in regards to the Cooperstown induction. So I think he still has hope, even though this case might drag on, who knows, to the Supreme Court, and then who knows.
Well, the whole question is that when you're talking about breaking records that other people have set in the past when these like steroids were not available, you were talking about was Hank Aaron's record?
Right.
Is that you were talking
755.
about? Yeah. When you're talking about records being broken by people that did not use steroids, for sure, that if you look at the historical perspective of baseball being America's sport or America's game, I can tend to agree with you that when somebody's found to be a cheater, it's almost like it won't matter. It won't matter if he was totally vindicated, and if everyone. And the owner of Belco said, I never, ever gave him steroids, and nobody ever gave him steroids, and he never used steroids, even with all that, just because of the past.
Well, he did have this Kimberly Bell accusing him, so that was testimony. I think she testified for an hour and a half, saying that there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that he was using the steroids, and then he, like I said, he hung around with Mr. Anderson, and that this was all very suspicious, and there was these physiological changes and all that kind of stuff. But then other people might argue that she just, this was sour grapes because I guess she was a mistress, and then he went around and got married again, and there was some cities, he said there were wife cities, and he didn't want Bell visiting those cities because his wife might show up. And so there might be other reasons for testimony, that were